For our first story, we have, am I the ass for saying I would terminate my pregnancy if the baby had a genetic condition, and now my husband is considering a divorce? A couple of weeks ago, I found out I'm pregnant. My husband and I had been talking about starting a family for a while, so this was supposed to be an exciting moment for us. However, during a conversation about prenatal testing, I told him that if we found out the baby had a severe genetic condition, such as Down syndrome, I would choose to terminate the pregnancy. I also shared my belief that it is extremely selfish to knowingly bring a child into the world with serious medical or developmental challenges. To me, it would be unfair to the child, to myself, and to my husband. Raising a child with severe disabilities is an enormous lifelong commitment, one that affects every aspect of a family's life, and I don't believe it is responsible to willingly choose that path when there is an option to prevent it. I also said that either raising a child like that or having an hereditary condition and choose to be pregnant, instead of adopting, for example, is extremely selfish as well. My husband was horrified. He said he never realized I felt this way and that he couldn't believe I would even consider terminating a pregnancy just because the child wouldn't be perfect. He accused me of being cold, pro-Eugene St. and lacking empathy, saying that every child deserves love regardless of their challenges. He also strongly disagreed with my opinion that people with hereditary conditions should think twice before having children, calling it an extreme and disturbing mindset. Since then, things between us have been tense, and now he says he is seriously considering divorce. He told me that we have completely different values when it comes to family and that he doesn't think he can stay married to someone who sees things this way. I was shocked that he would take it this far, but he says he doesn't want to raise children with someone who believes in selective reproduction. I never expected this conversation to lead to such a massive rift in our marriage. I don't see my stance as cruel, just practical and responsible. Am I the ass for being honest about my beliefs, even though they are making my husband want to leave me? TLDR. I recently found out I'm pregnant and told my husband that I would terminate if prenatal testing showed the baby had a severe genetic condition. I believe it's selfish to knowingly bring a child into the world who will suffer. My husband was horrified, says we have different values, and is now considering divorce. Am I the ass? That's the end of our first post. Let's see what the commenters had to say. Our first commenter says, I'm old enough that I have two elderly friends with severely disabled children. 83. Has a daughter and a son who are both high needs, physically able, but autistic and low IQ. Her children are now in their 60s. Nowadays her husband and her would have been offered genetic counseling after their daughter was born. Caring for two high needs children broke up her marriage. T. 60, had a Down syndrome daughter but was only 37 when she had her, and so was not offered an amniocentesis test as she was then considered low risk. She is widowed and has to consider finding sheltered accommodation for her daughter as she will never be fully independent. Neither of you are in the wrong, but I doubt your marriage will survive this as your views are incompatible. Our second commenter says, you need to be in marriage counseling together. Even your medical provider can set you up with a genetic counselor. It seems like you have a fundamental difference in values. Unfortunate to find out when you're about to become parents. You should be honest about your beliefs, but you may have to live with the consequences. Our third commenter says, I felt the same way as your husband when I was pregnant with our kids. Idealistic thinking and all. And then my kids got older, my husband's chronic pain condition began, and then it began in my kids. Had we known he had this debilitating condition just waiting to surface, and that it would be passed to our kids, we would have been child-free or adopted. Seeing your kids suffer and knowing that you caused it is hard to deal with. For our second story, we have, am I the ass for refusing to give my parents the first grandchild after they disowned me? Am I the ass for refusing to give my parents the first grandchild after they disowned me? So, some background. When I, 27 female, was 19, I got pregnant by my then boyfriend. My super conservative parents lost it. They told me I had ruined my future, called me irresponsible, and gave me an ultimatum: either give the baby up for adoption or be cut off completely. I refused to give up my child, so they followed through. No financial help, no contact, nothing. It was hard, but I made it work. I finished college, built a career, and raised my son, now 7M, without them. They never once reached out, even when they knew where I was. Fast forward to now, my younger sister, 24 female, just had her first baby, and suddenly, my parents are obsessed with being grandparents. They threw a huge baby shower, constantly post about being first-time grandparents, and act like my son doesn't exist. It stung, but I let it go. But then out of nowhere they reached out to me, saying they want to reconnect, because my son is actually their first grandchild, and they feel guilty for missing out. They even had the audacity to say my son deserves to know his real family. I told them absolutely not. They made their choice 7 years ago, and I won't let them waltz back into my son's life just because they suddenly care about being grandparents. They got mad and said I was being cruel and selfish for punishing them for past mistakes. My sister is saying I should at least consider it for my son's sake, but I don't think I owe them anything. That's the end of our second post. Let's see what the commenters had to say. Our first commenter says, "I bet money that someone remembered that you had a kid and called them on it. They're trying to reconnect to save face on the community." Our second commenter says, "Not the asshole, I'm betting $1 million someone called them out on the fact that they actually have a 7-year-old grandchild and embarrassed them." Our third commenter says, "Not the asshole. Your sister says you should consider for the sake of your son? I think that for the sake of your son you shouldn't consider it. He deserves better than to be around people like that, and he deserves better than to watch his mom be treated like garbage by the people who abandoned her." For our last story, we have, "Am I the asshole for withholding sex because my husband won't get a vasectomy? Neither of us want children. This was discussed and agreed upon very early on in our relationship. The subject of sterilization came up during our engagement. We agreed it would be easier, cheaper, and less invasive for him to get a vasectomy versus me getting a basal. He said he would be sterilized after we got married. We've been married for 3 years now. Sterilization has been the focus of several arguments over the years, which have only gotten more frequent since RVW was overturned. We live in a red state with an absolute ban. There is legislature being proposed to document pregnant women and penalize out-of-state termination. I'm terrified of getting pregnant. It would ruin my life. He knows my feelings. Every time I ask him about getting sterilized, he always says the same thing. I'm too busy, I don't have time, it's invasive, getting into urology will take forever, they don't even put you to sleep, etc. He's a first-year resident doctor. It's true he is very busy. He works anywhere from 30 to 70 hours per week. I'm a first-year PA student. I spend 50+ hours a week attending class and studying. But he has the luxury of taking time off. I do not. For the next 2 years, my schedule will be inflexible. He claims vasectomies are just as invasive as a laparoscopic basal. I told him that's simply not true, hence why general anesthesia is required for a basal and only local anesthesia for a vasectomy. Not to mention bisalps have a longer healing period and carry more risks than vasectomies. Considering his extensive medical knowledge, I was shocked by his statement. We are both in our 20s. It's substantially harder for young women to find a provider who will sterilize them than it is for young men. I started looking for a provider months ago and found some promising leads. He hasn't even done a Google search. I feel so disgusted, disappointed, and angry. He knows I'm terrified of getting pregnant. He knows basalp is the more invasive procedure. He knows the entire process of finding a provider, scheduling the appointment, having the procedure, and then recovering post-OP will be more difficult, time-consuming, and expensive. I asked him why he's so unwilling to have the procedure. Is he scared? Does he want children? He said no to both, then repeats the same excuses. I finally told him to forget it, and that I'll go ahead with sterilization myself. But sex is off the table and will be for the foreseeable future. Despite being on birth control, I'm no longer willing to take the risk. He thinks my reaction is unfair. Am I the asshole? Edit. Wow. Crazy how many people crawled out of the woodwork to tell me I'm punishing my husband by refusing sex. As if my body is a toy being taken away from him. Disgusting. That's the end of our last post. Let's see what the commenters had to say. Our first commenter says, "Greater than he claims vasectomies are just as invasive as a laparoscopic basal. He has such little respect for you that he will tell you a lie, knowing that you know otherwise." Our second commenter says, His body his choice, but that also means you get to decide on your form of birth control, in this case, abstinence, which is the most effective, safest, painless, least invasive option. Our third commenter says, if he's a first-year resident, then he really should know better. And if not, I pity you and all his possible patients. A vasectomy is a much simpler procedure. There's a reason it's done in the office versus in the OR like a salpingectomy. If your husband doesn't understand that simple difference, maybe he should consider a much simpler career. Also, don't put up with this shush plus tea. You are not the asshole, but if he continues to do this and you stay with him, then YTA to yourself. That's all for today. If you enjoyed, please leave a like and subscribe. Thank you, and have a wonderful day.